Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for the release of the Student Safety Task Force Report. I'm Cherie Johnson, the Public Information Officer for Prince George's County Public Schools. In a few moments, you'll hear from Dr. Kevin Maxwell, the Chief Executive Officer for Prince George's County Public Schools, followed by Dr. Charlene Dukes, Chair of the Student Safety Task Force, and Dr. Segun Eubanks, Chair of the Prince George's County Board of Education. Following the remarks, we will open it up for questions. Please step up to the microphone for your questions. We want to ensure that everyone is able to hear the questions with the live stream. And please hold your questions until the end of all of the remarks. And now I would like to bring up Dr. Kevin Maxwell.
Thank you, Cherie, and good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I want to begin by thanking Dr. Dukes for taking on the enormous responsibility of chairing this task force amidst all of her other responsibilities and devoting so many hours to accomplishing the task at hand. I also want to thank and commend all of the members of the task force, all of them volunteers, who gave of their time when Dr. Dukes and I asked them to serve. They met extensively beyond their work days. They made themselves available by phone, on the weekend, all in the service to our school system, our parents, and most importantly, to our children. Earlier this year, when I established the task force, it was done for three key reasons. Since day one, I have been committed to enacting real and substantive change regarding student safety and education in Prince George's County. Our children deserve this commitment is number two. As an educator and lifelong member of this community, ensuring that our children receive a quality education in a safe environment is personal to me. And as CEO, I take my responsibility to our children very seriously, and this is indeed a serious matter. With the establishment of the task force, I was determined to have an independent and thorough review not only of our policies and procedures, but also of our training, our hiring practices, and our curriculum to determine through a neutral but forward-thinking lens how we might improve upon our efforts to protect our children from harm while providing them with a quality education. And that is just exactly what this report being released today by Dr. Dukes will help us to do. With that, I'd like to turn the podium over to Dr. Charlene Dukes. Dr. Dukes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Maxwell. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today, and I thank all of you for coming. Many of you are here today, including Dr. Maxwell, Dr. Eubanks, the Board of Education, the broader school community, and the media, because we know that you have eagerly awaited the release of this report by the Student Safety Task Force. Before I begin, several of my colleagues on the task force are here this afternoon, and I'd like to introduce them. While I stand here representing the team consisted of a number of people who contributed to the work. So we have with us today Ms. Michelle Booth Cole, the Executive Director of Safe Shores, District of Columbia Children's Advocacy Center, and Ms. Renee Battle Brooks, an Assistant State's Attorney. We were joined by Dr. Joshua Sharfstein, Associate Dean for Public Health Practice and Training and Faculty in Health Policy and Management at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Gloria Brown, Director of Social Services for Prince George's County. Judy Bressler, Attorney at Law, Carney, Callahan, Bresler, Bennett, and Schur. Dr. Christina Cowell-Smith, Assistant State Superintendent, Division of Student, Family, and School Support from the Maryland State Department of Education. Dr. Brenda Jones-Harden, Associate Professor, Department of Human Development and Quantitative Methodology, University of Maryland, College Park. And Blanca Abrico, the parent of a student at Robert R. Gray Elementary School. Thanks to all of the task force members for their time and dedication to this important matter. As you all have heard, Dr. Maxwell approached me in February of 2016 to ask that I chair the task force. As president of Prince George's Community College, what I do know is firsthand how important safety and well-being of our students is to the parents and families, the teachers, staff, and residents of this county. I am entrusted with this responsibility every day, and it is one that I do not take lightly. It is the responsibility of adults to protect children from harm, and that is the underlying theme in this report. It is inextricably woven throughout the 5 major recommendations, the 61 considerations, and the 28 suggestions contained within the report. When the task force was commissioned, Dr. Maxwell set no boundaries or limits on what and where we could examine and the recommendations that we would ultimately put forward. He was clear in his expectation that the task force could and would have access to whom and whatever was necessary in order to complete and address the charge. He asked us to examine and consider carefully every policy, every procedure, and every practice currently in place in order to provide comprehensive recommendations to ensure a quality education could be provided in a safe environment for our children. And that was the top priority of the task force. So let me talk briefly about the process and how we arrived at the final report that's being released today. Over the course of the last 3 months, the task force met a minimum of 30 times, with more than 500 hours dedicated to completing the charge. As laid out in the report, the task force members divided ourselves and our work into 4 key areas: culture and climate, reporting and training, screening of employees, volunteers, vendors, contractors, and visitors, and curriculum and counseling. We then conducted a thorough review of the school system's existing policies, administrative procedures, protocols, practices, and curriculum with a critical eye, and we compared all of that to best practices. As part of our work, we also distributed a survey to parents, staff, students, and the community at large to solicit their input, including asking for their perceptions, opinions, and beliefs about the 4 key areas that I just identified. We also solicited comments with regard to what the public thought to be the current strengths and weaknesses of current policies, procedures, and practices, and finally, what recommendations they might provide. 405 individuals responded to the survey and gave the task force 2,835 responses to the questions that were asked. This important step also helped to inform the final report, and we want to thank everyone for his or her contributions. We conducted confidential interviews with a wide range of school employees, vendors, contractors, and volunteers, because we wanted to assess student safety and how it might be improved from their perspective. Their voices were indispensable, and we are grateful for their willingness to meet with individual members of the task force. Our responsibility today is to provide the findings and recommendations to assist Dr. Maxwell and the board in creating a quality educational atmosphere and a safe environment for our students. I speak for the entire task force when I say that we stand ready to support Dr. Maxwell and the Board of Education as they work collaboratively and swiftly to implement any and all of the recommendations laid out in this report. Their work, our work, the work of the Prince George's County Public Schools, and the work of our community at large, we believe is just beginning. With this in mind, please permit me to highlight the key recommendations in the report. We view these recommendations as the foundation to both immediate and future success. Additionally, we laid out 61 specific considerations relating to the 4 key areas of review, and I'll repeat those: culture and climate, reporting and training, screening of employees, volunteers, visitors, vendors, and contractors, and curriculum and counseling. We also provided 28 suggestions where we believe administrative procedures can be updated, clarified, and enhanced, and these are all described in detail in the full report. So now I'm going to speak primarily to the 5 major recommendations. On reporting procedures, the CEO should report publicly each year on system-wide efforts related to student safety, including providing data, strategies, and outcomes on the steps that have been taken to address the major recommendations of this report. Given the need to create the task force and the concerns generated across our community, the CEO, the superintendent, Dr. Maxwell, has an obligation to operate in a transparent and constructive manner regarding the acceptance and implementation of the recommendations, considerations, and suggestions, all provided to promote and enhance student safety. The community has a right to know, understand, and applaud the efforts that are taken by the Board of Education and the CEO in implementing these efforts across the system. The second recommendation references accountability. The CEO should ensure that each principal conducts safety assessments and uses the results to develop and implement comprehensive strategies to include screening and training of employees, volunteers, vendors, contractors, evaluation of physical facilities, and curriculum or lesson content reviews. We know that children are transported to schools every day. They rely on bus drivers to get them there, staff to welcome them, teachers to facilitate their learning, and administrators to ensure that the environment, both human and physical, is safe and conducive to learning. Parents and children need to be assured that everything possible is being done to support them. Are hallways well lit? Are there areas that present safety issues? Do building employees understand and adhere to the policies and procedures? Are there best practices whose implementation can support increased attention to safety? And what are the system consequences for not acting appropriately and swiftly to address any issues? The third recommendation is about oversight. The CEO should establish an office of monitoring, accountability, and compliance with direct reporting to Dr. Maxwell. That office will assume responsibility for assuring implementation of procedures associated with the policies approved by the board and to assure fidelity in training and the awareness of individual responsibility to report to whom, by when, and to be in compliance with all procedures and policies. The Office of Monitoring, Accountability, and Compliance can, quite frankly, send a direct message to schools and the larger community about the expectation that adherence to policies, procedures, and accepted practice is significant, it's important in schools, and to the system as a whole. It also allows for a more sustained and long-term approach to documenting dependability and commitment to training, reporting, and screening. Persons within the offices can be accountable for seeking, reviewing, and suggesting best practices or appropriate changes in the current practice. And universal precautions is the fourth recommendation. The school system should develop and implement a universal precautions approach to screening and training of employees, volunteers, vendors, and contractors, to include a searchable database for rapid identification of red flags. This recommendation is intended to underline the belief that all individuals who come into contact with children in our schools on a regularly defined basis must be trained and screened and approved before contact with children is permitted. It might also support the need for the timeline in training and screening to be shortened as deemed appropriate by the system or at the local school level, and for it to happen at regularly occurring intervals. For instance, should training and/or screening occur annually for all or specific categories of employees or other individuals who come into contact with children? Should there be a timeline by which the training and screening is completed prior to access to children? And the fifth recommendation evolves around curriculum. The school system should update the curricular content focused on preventing child sexual abuse that is taught grades K through 12. It has to be developmentally and age appropriate. It has to engage parents and guardians, and it has to meet evidence-based criteria for effectiveness in mitigating instances of child sexual abuse. So recommended changes in the health curriculum related to the prevention of abuse and ensuring student safety occurs much more rapidly today. As experts learn, more about what needs to occur in schools and communities to protect children, that information is being released by institutions of higher education with centers of excellence that are designed to research, analyze, and address this topic. We also have major nonprofit organizations that have laser-like focus on protecting children. While adults are responsible for protecting children, through curriculum, students can be given age-appropriate messages and strategies that will allow them to talk to teachers, to talk to parents and administrators when they or their classmates have a concern. Again, the task force believes that these recommendations are just a starting point, and I refer you in the report to the 5 major recommendations, the 61 specific considerations related to the 4 key areas, and the 28 suggestions that support updating, clarifying, or enhancing administrative procedures that are outlined in this report. On behalf of the task force, I wish to again thank Dr. Maxwell for the opportunity to present our findings and recommendations here today. We appreciate the patience of the school's community and the residents of Prince George's County as we work diligently and expeditiously to lay out our work, research it, and provide recommendations, suggestions, and considerations. We know that the original deadline date for the report was May 2nd. We presented it. We're presenting it today. We believe that the gravity of the charges required that we be diligent and focused in our work and present a full report. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Maxwell, but I do know that there will be an opportunity for questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dukes, for providing that snapshot into the hard work of the task force and its key recommendations. I will speak more to that in a moment, as it is clear there is much work to be done to accomplish the important task at hand. I would like to speak to the deadline, though, if I might, for a minute. As Dr. Dukes and I spoke over the course of the last few months, and the question of dates came up, we focused on the importance of getting the work right, not meeting a deadline that we could adjust the work afterwards to accommodate for that lateness. And so, again, I just would share that it is more important to have the right report with the right information than to have it on May 2nd. And so I appreciate the fact that it is here today and all the work that you did. Before I discuss our path forward, at this time I'd like to invite to the microphone Dr. Segun Eubanks, Chairman of the Board of Education and a strong supporter of the task force, who is as committed as I am to making sure that our school system gets this right. Dr. Eubanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First, permit me to echo Dr. Maxwell's sentiments and thank both Dr. Dukes for her tremendous effort in sharing the work of this task force and the diverse array of professionals and committed citizens who gave their time to make this final report a truly collaborative effort. As parents of Prince George's County Public School students and engaged citizens, I and my fellow colleagues shared the shock and bewilderness upon learning of the tragic revelations that happened in and around our public schools some months ago. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Maxwell, County Executive Baker, and State Attorney Alsobrook at a press conference in the wake of these dreadful events. I must commend my board colleagues, county government, administrative leadership, and community leaders for joining together in a proactive response, establishing this independent task force, which Dr. Maxwell charged to go wherever its research, studies, surveys, interviews, findings, and recommendations directed its members, was perhaps the most significant of many actions we've taken in the wake of these incidents. My colleagues and I have been anxious to receive this report and respectful of the work of the task force. From the outset, we wanted to ensure that the task force was allowed to conduct its work in a way that would lead to an independent, comprehensive, and substantive final report. Understanding the gravity and importance of this issue, the board is committed to do whatever is necessary to guarantee that our children receive a quality education and that Prince George's County schools have policies and procedures in place to protect every single student. That is our promise, and that is our responsibility. So if policy changes are in order, and I believe they are, the board pledges to do whatever we can to make necessary those changes to be effective when our children return to school in the fall. To that end, I will call for special sessions of the entire Board of Education during our summer break to closely examine the report's findings and enact any policy enhancements or changes that may be necessary. I've instructed our board counsel and executive director to work with the administration to provide specific recommendations for policy changes and/or new policies that reflect any of the findings and recommendations of the task force. Similarly, if any other action of the board and the board's part may be necessary in the future, whether it relates to curriculum, personnel, legislation, or budget, we are prepared to move quickly as a board to take action. This report and the task force final work is vital. All of us, board members, administrators, parents, staff, and members of the community have a responsibility to make certain that our children receive a quality education in a safe and secure environment. On behalf of the board, I pledge to make this commitment stand not just for today, but every day. Also, on behalf of the board, I thank Dr. Dukes and the task force and Dr. Maxwell once again for keeping their eyes firmly focused on what matters most. I will end by passing a message on to other parents all across this great county. We are committed to gaining your trust and ensuring that every student who enters Prince George's County Public School receives a high-quality education provided by caring adults in a safe and nurturing environment. Thank you. I'll hand it back over to Dr. Maxwell.
Thank you, Dr. Eubanks, for your commitment, for your leadership, and for your partnership. And that thank you extends to the board as well. As I said earlier, as a member of this community, this is personal to me. I have the privilege to work, to live, and to serve in the community where I grew up and have raised my children. As an educator, a father, and a grandfather, I believe it is our duty to protect our children and our care. That's why this report is essential. It serves as an important step of many toward improving protections for our children and ensuring that our school system reflects the commitment and values of providing a quality education in a safe environment. As CEO, I will do everything in my power to keep our children safe, and that is my promise and commitment to our students, our parents, and our community. We are still carefully and thoroughly reviewing the findings of this report, and we'll make additional changes to our practices as we move forward. However, based on what we have already been able to review and analyze, I have already instructed my staff to immediately begin implementing the following recommendations. First, I am convening a work group of high-level school system administrators to review and implement all or most of the 61 considerations and 28 opportunities to update, clarify, and/or enhance administrative procedures within the categories of culture and climate, reporting and training, screening of employees, volunteers, visitors, vendors, and contractors, and review our curriculum and counseling. Second, I agree with the recommendation that I publicly report each year on our student safety efforts system-wide, including data, strategies, and outcomes. I will consult with my staff to determine the most effective means for doing so to ensure wide dissemination and understanding of efforts, and will begin development of an annual report. Third, I will work with my team to ensure that each principal conducts safety assessments and uses the results to develop and implement comprehensive strategies to include screening and training of employees, volunteers, vendors, and contractors, evaluation of the physical facilities, and curriculum and lesson content reviews. Further, I will work with my team to set evaluative measures for principals based on their ability to develop and implement these strategies. Finally, we will engage and share with parents, guardians, and community members the expectations regarding child safety and the processes undertaken to support safe environments for our children. Fourth, I will immediately establish a new Office of Monitoring, Accountability, and Compliance. This new office, which will directly report to me, will be charged with the responsibility for overseeing the fidelity in training, implementation of, and compliance to the new procedures, protocols, and curriculum suggested in the remainder of the report. Fifth, I am mandating the development and implementation of a universal precautions approach to screening and training to include a searchable database for rapid identification of red flags in consultation with outside experts in the field. Finally, I'm directing the Division of Teaching and Learning to update our school system's curricular content on preventing and teaching about child sexual abuse pre-kindergarten through grade 12 in a developmentally age-appropriate manner. The task force's findings were clear that much work is to be done. With the recent enactment of House Bill 72, Aaron's Law, passed by the General Assembly this past session, requiring the Maryland State Department of Education to help point the way for local school districts to develop age-appropriate education on the awareness and prevention of sexual abuse and assault as part of our health curriculum, I am confident that we can accomplish this. One of the first tasks at hand will be revising and/or adopting appropriate policies and procedures. Many of the needed changes have been identified by the task force. Once my team has prepared any proposed policy changes working alongside of the board staff, I am sure that the board will act expeditiously, as Dr. Eubanks has stated. My promise to students, parents, staff, and members of the community is that I will take whatever actions are necessary under my authority to implement the administrative procedure recommendations quickly so that when classes resume in the fall, these changes are already in effect. Finally, as many of you are aware, law enforcement authorities have been leading the criminal investigation related to the horrific events at Judge Sylvania Woods Elementary School. Since the authorities announced the arrest and investigation, we have provided them with our unwavering support and cooperation. Those authorities have given us a green light to proceed with our administrative investigation. To accomplish that, I have appointed an external independent team to conduct the personnel investigation related to what happened and make recommendations to me. As a personnel matter, I cannot go into much detail, but did want to announce that I asked the interim state superintendent of schools, Dr. Jack Smith, who also serves as the chairman of the board for the State Center for School Safety, to authorize the center's executive director to establish this team of investigators from across the state to investigate staff conduct and make recommendations. In turn, Dr. Smith has agreed. As I have said before, if it is discovered that anyone employed by our school system failed to act in accordance with the law, our policies of reporting, I will take swift and decisive action. In closing, let me again thank the task force members and particularly Dr. Dukes for their diligence, serious of purpose, independent judgment, and efforts on behalf of our children. We will all be better for their service. For the last 3 months, I have been encouraged by the spirit of the students, parents, staff, and community members of Prince George's County. Whether in meetings, at schools, or walking down the street, the outpouring of support for our children is a testament to our shared values and who we are as a community. To the teachers, principals, and staff, thank you for your efforts. Each and every day you enter our schools and facilities focused on one thing, improving the lives of our children. There is no more important task that we have been given than to ensure our children are safe and receiving a quality education. Without question, there is work to do, but together, students, parents, staff, and the Board of Education, our community, we can make real and lasting change for the betterment of our children. With that, we'll open it up for questions.
Good afternoon. Tom Fitzgerald from Fox 5 News. There has been questions about transparency in your work in this community. So I'll ask 2 questions. Why were there no public hearings held? And in the course of your questioning, did you speak to any of the parents or guardians of the alleged victims Deontay Carraway?
I'll answer your second question first, and the answer is no, we did not. There is an investigation going on, and we spoke to others outside of that, of those families who were impacted. With regards to your first question, we believe that the work of the task force was of such a critical nature And certainly there were questions that we were going to be asking that we wanted people to be candid in their responses so that we could come forward today with a report that would really move the school system forward. And we did not want there to be any distraction as to whether people would be candid in their responses. Now, we are aware that there was a complaint filed at the state, and we certainly await the outcome of that complaint.
Just to follow quickly, were you advised by legal counsel not to contact the alleged victims' families, or was that a decision of the task force itself?
That was a decision of the task force. We never spoke with legal counsel about the families.
William Ford with Washington Informer. This is more for you, Dr. Eubanks. In regards to the Choosing Public Schools workshop, how will you and others ensure parents that the school system is a great place to be in light of these allegations that have been going on?
Sure. Well, it would be my intention to speak not only to my own experiences and those of countless other families who have gone through the school system and received a world-class education in safe and supportive environments, to know that we can do it, and then to ensure that we're going to make whatever changes that we need to make to ensure that that reality not only happens to most of our children as it does now, but to every single one of our children, and to let parents know that the more concerned and engaged parents who are in our system, the better off our system will be, the safer it will be, the more high-achieving it will be. And so we need them to come and join us in this, and that's the message that I'm going to give to the parents who are considering choosing this great public school system.
Tracy Wilkins, NBC4 Washington. So we asked questions about the agendas that were used for the task force through a Maryland Public Information Act request. We received an agenda, and one of the first items was a discussion about the exclusion of the task force from the Maryland Public Information Act and how to deal with media inquiries. Again, speaking to the way that this task force handled public scrutiny and questions about what was being done. What is the response to why this was so high on the level of priorities, given the magnitude of what you all were investigating here?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Why was the Maryland Public Information Act and exclusion from the act such a high priority here?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but I don't think I would say it was a high priority to exclude. I would say we discussed the ramifications around who was answering which questions, if people called the community college or they called my school system, who took the calls and where do they go, and what about other public input, what about inquiries from the press? Were we going to have people who were spokespeople for the group? As far as the Public Information Act, we believe that we are appropriate in the way we did that. We'll see the outcome of the complaint, but we believe that we were appropriate in the way it was handled. In order to get the work at hand accomplished in the period of time we want, and as Dr. Dukes has already said, that people feel that they could speak confidentially about some fairly serious topics here, the surveys and the interviews and the way that the task force went about it, we feel was appropriate. I think the task force feels it was appropriate. And again, we'll see the outcome of the complaint.
Were the teachers and the principal, Judge Woods, were they interviewed as well throughout the process, and any of the folks who played a direct part in the Caraway case?
No, not at all. Because we know that there's going to be a separate investigation. So we did not interview anyone associated with Judge Sylvania Woods, principals, teachers, bus drivers who drove kids there, food service workers, parents, not at all.
The follow-up question to that is, how can you begin to address what happened with the Caraway situation without speaking to the culture of a school where it was all happening, where these kids were sexually abused?
Well, one is that the first thing you have to understand is what the charge of the task force was, and it was not to investigate the Caraway situation. So that's the first thing, is to understand the charge that we were given. We were given a charge to look forward in terms of what the school system might do, could do, and would do to improve any practices, any procedures, or any policies around the prevention of child sexual abuse. So we were not asked to investigate the Caraway situation, and we did not. That was not our role.
Dr. Maxwell, what did you learn from this report? What did you learn from this report that you didn't already know? That's my question.
So I think, I think there are a number of things I would take from the report that were perhaps not obvious, at the beginning. The first, is that by asking independent set of eyes, people who are not part of the process and procedures of the school district, you get a different viewpoint. And I thought it was instructive in the report, first of all, to talk about the monitoring and compliance. I think that you can come in and you can, say, well, there's a training in place, there's this in place, there's that in place, but whether or not it really, happens with fidelity the way that you would like it to, sometimes that independent set of eyes is helpful in that. I think particularly that a lot of the training that we have been doing in our school system, and I'm not sure that it's dissimilar in lots of places, has been oriented towards a perception that stranger issues are, what's behind child sex abuse and things, where in fact, the task force report speaks to, a different orientation for our training. And so, that was insightful, I believe. I also think the universal precautions, as the task force has called it, is going to be of interest to us. Obviously, I have said we're going to work to adopt that, to say what does that look like and how does that happen in real practice. I believe that is a concept that has not been in place in Prince George's County, and I think that will be helpful and instructive to us. And then lastly, I think there are a number of recommendations and procedures in terms of how we go about doing things that will be helpful. Some of those include screening, for example, and the differences between commercial background checks and background checks that we do for most of our professional employees that include state police and FBI. There are a couple of different kinds of background checks, and who gets which ones and how often they get redone are insights that I believe come with importance from the task force.
Doctor, forgive me, I have to operate the equipment, and I can't necessarily address the microphone. I hope I can speak up loud enough for it to be heard. I noted some comments from some of the survey respondents, some significant talk about the Raptor system, and some anxiety among some of the respondents that it just doesn't work or it's uneven. And it seems to me a lot of school security is sort of placed on this idea that the Raptor system works. Can you address that for us, please?
So I can only say that, when I talk about, since I've been here, the things that we've tried to do is to make sure that Raptor system is in place in every school, that we've gone to this system of locked doors, video cameras, punching a button to talk to the office and be admitted or not admitted into the office, fencing off areas where there are outdoor temporary classrooms at schools so that kids are not easily accessible to, people who shouldn't be on school grounds and have access to children. I do think as we implemented and introduced things, getting the software right, getting things implemented correctly, but it again is an insight that we're going to have to take back, and we're going to really have to analyze, what is the down, rate? I mean, how often do we have those machines down, and how many schools, do we have that down to make sure that the system is doing what it is we want to do? It's not, other than the comments that I saw from the task force report, it's not something that people have been coming and saying, 50% of our schools are down for entire days or weeks at a time. But I do think that it's a place where we have to, to really look at it and see if, in fact, it is up most of the time and being used appropriately in our schools. And lastly, I would just say that, we appreciate, the people who did comment and gave us comments, because it's going to take all of us to get this work right.
If I could follow up, please. It appears from some of these comments and findings there's sort of an unevenness, or there has been, in implementing different procedures. Who's a volunteer, who's not? Is a mom who rides the school bus to the zoo as a chaperone, does she have to go through an FBI check? How about volunteer coaches? Does the apparent unevenness of all of this surprise you?
Actually, it does not surprise me. It is an area that we need to look at. The task force has made that clear. when you have a system the size of ours, I think the evenness is something that you strive for, and you would like to have perfection on every single day. There have been distinctions that are made with, I think, the understanding of everyone that if you're a volunteer and you're always with a member of the school system staff, for example, if you're invited into the media center to speak at career day, or you're a principal for a day and you're always escorted by the principal around the building, does that constitute as a volunteer that needs to have a background check, or the distinction about whether or not they're ever going to have access to children independent of a member of the school system staff? So it doesn't necessarily surprise me, because there are decisions clearly that are being made in schools. What I think the task force report calls for is making sure that we are being appropriately directive in how we consider each of those groups of individuals, and make sure that what we're requiring of them is appropriate.
Hi, Dr. Maxwell.
Hi.
The report is 50 pages long, and it really gets to a lot of problems with training and procedures and actually reporting. Do you see this as a systemic failure? Do you see that there's a systemic problem here and not just a case of a few missteps? Can you describe what you think this looks like?
So first of all, let me say I think the report was very thorough, and I appreciated it, and I appreciate its forward-looking focus. I don't think there's a systemic failure. I think most of our employees are doing what they should be doing. I think that there are, as the previous question talked about, there are places where it's not being implemented with fidelity. What we need to do is try to bring it to that place where it's implemented correctly in every place. We have had some very serious things happen in our school system, including this case that prompted the appointment of the task force. But we have, in context to that, we have over 200 schools. And that was a very serious thing at Judge Sylvania Woods. It continues to be a very serious thing. But I don't think that when you look at the fact that we have over 20,000 employees on any given day, that it speaks to the whole system of 20,000 people. Most of our employees go to work every day, and they do an excellent job for us. We have children who are, finishing school here and going year by year and going to some of the finest institutions in the country, and in a couple cases around the world. And we're fortunate to have that work going on. It does point, however, forward-looking to our improving the systems that we have in place to make sure that we do everything that we can to make sure our children are safe.
But there were some substantial gaps in training. I mean, some basic things about noticing abuse in schools and that kind of thing. I mean, it was pretty extensive on the training.
So I think one of the things we asked them to look at is training. And our training, as I said a little bit ago, has been focused on stranger worries, not necessarily about looking for the signs of child abuse. But I'm not sure that I would call that a systemic failure. I would say it's a place for us to grow and learn and refocus the way that we're training.
And the 28 places to improve the procedures, that doesn't strike you as systemic either?
So, I think we have 28 places where we may improve. I think that when you look at the number of administrative procedures that we have, 28 is not like 95% of our procedures. It's a small number of our procedures, and it offers us room to grow and improve, but I don't think that it equates to systemic failure.
Dr. Maxwell, Kate Ryan, WTOP. I'm confused by something. When I was trained as a teacher 17 years ago, first thing from my instructors was if a child comes to you with some kind of concern that signals any kind of abuse, you are duty-bound to report it. Was that missing in this case, and is that not a part of training? What happens today when a child comes to a teacher and says, someone touched me, someone made me feel uncomfortable?
So the training video, while I believe it needs to be changed as well, actually spoke very clearly to what is required in terms of mandated reporting. And it's the same training that I received when I started in the school system a whole lot longer ago than that. When you put that training in, there are a lot of things that have to happen. People have to follow it and implement it. I think the task force spoke in the report pretty well to, it's not necessarily not having procedures, it's implementation. It's not having policies necessarily, but are they being implemented appropriately? It's not necessarily that you don't have some curriculum, and where we can improve in all of these areas, that's true, but is the curriculum being taught with fidelity the way it's supposed to? You know, there's a big difference between places to improve and places to grow, and attempts to make our schools an even safer place than they are. But again, I think that the training, I don't know if you've ever seen the video or not, I don't know where you did your 17 years ago training, but that video clearly says you have mandatory reporting responsibilities.
So getting back to what Donna was saying, this didn't happen in one case or two cases or three. We're talking about 19 children. Doesn't that suggest that there's a widespread problem?
So if I'm thinking of the same 19 you are, is that all one school?
I'm not certain of that. You may be able to tell me.
Well, I'm not sure what you're the one asking the question, so you need to be clear for me. I think, I don't think, I mean, I can't be clear for you.
It wasn't a one-time offense. Isn't this a larger problem than just one slip-up?
So this was one school, and I said this is a very terrible thing that happened. I've used a number of verbiage. If you go back to my interviews over time, it was heinous, it was awful, it was terrible, it shouldn't have happened. But I have 200 and some other schools where it did not happen. And so again, when we're talking about the difference between systemic and non-systemic, we had a problem, and we know that we need to do better going forward.
In the absence of others, if I could just follow up briefly, there was something that struck me here, and I think I've probably seen it in other places, where people expressed they just didn't feel confident in reporting because they feared an investigation would taint somebody's reputation. Things might not, you know, this is the nature of reporting. It's difficult for people to do. It takes some courage. Based on that, what are some of your thoughts for school employees and others after you read something like that? What's your message to them?
Our job isn't to protect each other. Our job is to protect the children in our charge. That is the only thought that I have about it. This is not about whether I'm going to report somebody in the room next door or down the hall from me and what may or may not happen from that. If that was your child that the allegation is about or concerned about, wouldn't you want someone to report it? That's the absolute only consideration that there is.
Does it suggest a lack of confidence in the system of investigating these things that people may not feel comfortable coming?
I don't think it represents that at all. I don't think it represents a lack of confidence in the investigation. We investigate everything that comes to our attention. I think it may represent something else, but I don't think it's, I think it's in fact quite the opposite, that they are worried about that investigation.
Last question. On page 17, there's a focus on leadership within the schools taking responsibility and implementing standards. The question is, was there a question about whether principals really understood what it was that they were supposed to be doing in the school system? Is that what this is really addressing, or did they know and just not do what they were supposed to?
So Dr. Dukes, I think, may want to speak to that, but as I read the report, it's not that people didn't know what they're doing or didn't want to know what they were doing. It's a way to improve. Again, I was a principal for many years. You have a lot of things that you have to do, and it's a growth opportunity to look at things a little bit differently. So do we look at unoccupied rooms? Do we look at other things? I'll give you an example. You know, when the worldwide terror threats first began, it's things all of a sudden in schools, we hadn't really given empty lockers a second thought. But all of a sudden, and you've been in schools, you are certainly aware of what I'm talking about, we were blocking off banks of lockers to make sure that nobody had access to empty or unused lockers. This is a place for us to grow, not an implication for somebody's poor behavior or improper work. Dr. Dukes, do you want to add to that, or is that fine?
I think that you've spoken to the intent of the task force.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for your attendance, and this concludes the news conference. I'll be available if you have some follow-up questions or need any other assistance. Thank you again for coming.